I'd like to say both. I start off understanding the broad lines and structure of what I'd like to be writing about. And I use a mind map to explore the different facets of that, bringing a sense of a narrative to the moment, but often themes tend to stick out before a narrative does. And once that plot is there, the architecture, the lines of that structure are there, the content seems to arise quite naturally. And at that point, I become a pantser. So I'll even surprise myself in the process. There's something else that's sort of channeling and working its way through me onto the page. And certainly by the time I get to the end of the process, I spend more time with my finger on the delete button of the keyboard than on the actual keys themselves. So there's a strong reliance on that editing process. But certainly I think that to say that it's one or the other would be inaccurate. I think he's not among my favorite authors, but he's the one who intrigues me the most, is William Faulkner. I'm fascinated by how utterly strenuous it is to read some of his work, and you're wondering the entire time what meaning comes out of a lot of his stream of consciousness. You'll get to the end of a novel and realize that there's an enormous amount of factual knowledge that you have from the experience of reading what seems quite muddled. But he has a talent for connecting with how we make meaning by reading between the lines. So in essence, his writing is very much about how we infer as the reader. And he's taken what would have been a background process, brought that to the foreground, and kind of agitated our consciousness with the sort of mania of a dreamscape, which still brings to our capability and our thinking a narrative. It's quite stunning. It's quite stunning. So I'd love to have a drink with William and find out what brought him to that kind of capability. If it wasn't magic mushrooms, what was it? Wanderlust has been at the heart of my inspiration and my grasping and striving for more learning and understanding about humanity. There's nothing like moving outside of what is familiar to fully appreciate what is familiar, but to also drink in the full expanse and diversity of what humanity has to offer. What we consider in our day-to-day existence as being normal is suddenly ripped out of its context and out of that idea of normality when you're in a new environment. And I think geography has a lot to do with it as well. New landscapes have such a way of imprinting the mind with new wisdom. I find that the rocky terrain of Washington, D.C., for instance, as you're traveling through that space, it's so overwhelming how beautiful the mountains are and their coexistence with amazing foliage. But you'll be in South Africa, in a sort of tropical part of South Africa, and have an entirely new experience of the air that you're breathing and the sun that you're feeling on your skin. And it's all the same sun, but not in the experience and the essence of it. So yes, I think the characters do, they emerge from those experiences of traveling and understanding, learning to understand. I think in the beginning, I struggled with the kind of writing that didn't trust that my reader would fully comprehend what I was trying to say. And I think I'm now on the other side of that. I now trust them to understand and infer a lot more than I'll put forward in my writing. And so I do ask for a little bit of interaction from the reader. I want them to feel connected to the work, but not necessarily comprehending of it, so that the meaning emerges as they work their way through the writing and start to connect the dots for themselves. I find that meaning making has to include the reader. You cannot create an enjoyable reading experience by being expository and trying to fill in all the gaps for them. And I think the greatest risk I've taken has been to pull back from trying to close all those gaps and be the polyfiller for the reader. Of both, but I don't think one is fully writing if you're not at once energized and exhausted. I think some of the inspiration that drives me does become exhausting if there's no way to channel it in a way that supports the flow of energy. So I work with mind mapping to help me balance the two. Exhaustion, I think, can also come from not respecting a block where you're being asked to connect with something that will ground you. If it's to go and drink a glass of water or take a walk outside or be with friends, something that doesn't necessarily include the writing as a physical act, but allows a background process to run. And I think that's an important aspect to recognizing that exhaustion needs to be respected. If you're working into that place of exhaustion, you're probably working backwards. I'm always reading about 4 or 5 books at the same time, and it takes me quite a while to work through all of them. And it's interesting how I find parallels through that process between what are not dissimilar books, or rather I should say, which are not similar books up front, and later on I find to be not dissimilar. When I finish them all off, eventually they're all finished at about the same time, and I feel like I've lost 5 friends in the process. What am I reading at the moment? At the moment, I'm settled upon a book called Effortless, which is about enjoying the ease of work that inspires one and truly loving that experience. And I've been looking at the poetry of Mary Oliver and enjoying the medicine of that in my day-to-day existence. There's a lot happening at the moment, and I love reading, but I find that a thick book can sometimes be quite intimidating. So I'm enjoying my sort of pocket-sized poetry packs at the moment with John Keats and Mary Oliver and Olive Schreiner, and taking what that brings as inspiration on a day-to-day basis just into the philosophical experience of reading, rather than trying to impress myself with finishing one book after the next. It has, in the sense that coming out in a public arena with the work that I've produced, it feels both brave and ridiculously enticing to the moment of understanding that I've come so far as to feel that it's something the world needs to hear, even if it's just my story, that there isn't necessarily a big lesson to be taught in the moral of the story. It's not a parable so much as a walk through the experience of my life. Being able to craft that story to the point of feeling that it's worthy of publication does involve a lot of wrestling with your own story. It's easy in life to avoid your own story and avoid your own writing. And I don't think that there's any one point of fiction that doesn't hold a truth in the author's experience. And essentially, we allow what is happening to write itself through us. And certainly isn't that the way we live life. If we're fully living life, we allow life to live through us. And for me, the publication of my writing has been a kind of nod to the experience of allowing that and being proud of it and wanting it to then speak back to me once it's out there, because it gets a life of its own. Again, I'd like to say both. The therapeutic side of it is certainly wrestling with the themes that come up and how they relate to memories, perhaps, or experiences of one's own character and personality that perhaps sit in contradiction to some of one's greater desires, or the way that you want the world to see you. And connecting with the fullest expanse of oneself, and learning to love oneself means that you work and walk through the shadows in order to receive the gifts that are there, latent to those shadows. To say that that's an awkward experience, I think, is an understatement of note. I would also echo then that experiencing that journey through those shadows allows for a spiritual awakening, because in receiving the gift of the shadow, one is suddenly awakened to the heightened state that the gift can allow to arise. And it is through that allowing that we come to a point of wisdom, and we come to a point of alchemical shift in appreciating that everything the world offers and everything our experience holds is sacred, that all experience is about an evolution, and it is merely a judging mind that stops that process and causes its repetition until we finally let go of the idea that whatever we're experiencing in the shadow is quote unquote bad. And much of the writing experience, I would say, asks us to do the work of that exploration and that wrestling. It need not be a negative experience, but I think that it's never easy. And certainly I think it's always therapeutic. And if you allow the expansion of that therapeutic experience to keep dawning upon you, it becomes a spiritual experience. Well, the writing of the short story for this book was based on a totem bird, the wren, because of its incredible song, that while all birds, I think, have something quite magical about the song that they emit or squawk, the wren is known to be among the most beautiful. And it's fascinating. The photographs I was finding of the wren were, for me, a sort of realization of how small it is in relation to nature, but how big its song is. And it's literally sung itself into being. I believe very strongly too that song is a different way of expressing appreciation and gratitude and emotion. We've long relied on poetry and words to help us express that, but often the ability to connect with something more abstract allows for those emotions to flow more freely. And for me, the wren was this playful, innocent, pervasive little character that had quite a profound effect on the world. And so for me, the writing comes a bit from that innocence and that ease. It should be about the joy of being, and that everyone's experience of life and the telling of that story is a song. I'd start with Virginia Woolf. She is an agitator. Stephen Fry, I like his perspective on the modern world as combined with the classical era. He somehow is able to find the relationship between modern mania and myth, and helps me feel better about the fact that there's nothing new under the sun, despite what we're experiencing on the planet at this moment. And well, I'm struggling to make a decision between Michelle Obama or Oprah Winfrey at this moment. I so enjoy their ability to exude power and motherhood, nurturing curiosity, and the exploration of pain at exactly the same time as the expression of joy. And for me, it is a true celebration of femininity that they bring to a world stage. And I really enjoy the fact that they can celebrate, complain, explore, and rummage around topics in a way that is allowing all women everywhere who do this to process life, the ability to express that as a skill. In the past, and certainly in boardrooms, I think that gets encouraged and dampened down. Sorry, not encouraged at all. And it is a way of being in the world and allowing the crystallized experience of something to emerge from the exploration of it. So I think it would be a very interesting dinner with Virginia, Stephen, and Michelle or Oprah. Maybe we'll just combine the two.